How a super empath destroys an avoidance ego. Most people assume that an avoidant partner is the one holding all the power in a relationship because they seem detached, independent, and emotionally unaffected by distance. They can disappear for days, avoid difficult conversations, and act as if nothing bothers them, while everyone else is struggling to understand what happened. But there is one type of person who eventually changes that entire dynamic, and that person is the super empath. Unlike the average partner who chases harder when an avoidant pulls away, a super empath begins the relationship with deep compassion, patience, and understanding, but eventually reaches a point where they see the pattern for what it really is. And when that moment arrives, something unexpected happens. The avoidant, who once felt completely in control, suddenly finds themselves losing the one thing they secretly depended on the most. Their ego takes a hit they never saw coming. A super empath is not simply someone who loves deeply. They are someone who can see through emotional walls while still offering kindness. They often understand the pain hiding behind cold behavior, which is why avoidants are frequently drawn to them in the first place. The avoidant feels safe because the empath keeps giving chances, keeps trying to understand, and keeps making excuses for emotionally unavailable behavior. At first, this feels perfect to the avoidant. They receive acceptance without having to become vulnerable. They get connection without exposing their deepest fears. But this arrangement only works as long as the super empath remains unaware of their own value. The moment they begin recognizing that their compassion is being taken for granted, the entire relationship starts to shift. One of the biggest mistakes avoidants make is assuming that the super empath will always stay. Because the empath has tolerated so much in the past, the avoidant convinces themselves that they can continue withdrawing, avoiding intimacy, and offering breadcrumbs instead of genuine emotional presence. Over time, this creates a dangerous level of overconfidence. The avoidant starts believing that no matter what they do, the empath will continue waiting. This belief feeds their ego. It creates the illusion that they are irreplaceable. But the reality is that the super empath is not weak. They are simply patient. And patience has limits. The destruction of the avoidance ego begins the moment the super empath stops chasing. Not because they are playing games or trying to teach a lesson, but because they finally understand that love cannot be carried by one person alone. For the first time, they stop sending the extra messages. They stop initiating every difficult conversation. They stop trying to decode mixed signals and inconsistent behavior. Instead, they redirect their energy toward themselves. This is the moment the avoidant starts feeling something they rarely experience. They feel uncertainty. The person who was always available is suddenly no longer available. The person who always reached out has become silent. And that silence becomes louder than any argument ever could. What hurts the avoidance ego even more is that the super empath leaves with dignity. They do not beg. They do not threaten. They do not create drama. They simply withdraw their emotional investment and begin focusing on their own growth. This is deeply unsettling because avoidants often expect emotional reactions. They expect anger, pleading, or attempts to pull them back into the relationship. When none of those things happen, they are left alone with something they have spent years avoiding, their own emotions. Suddenly, there is no one distracting them from the consequences of their behavior. There is no one absorbing the emotional burden for them. They are forced to face the emptiness created by their own avoidance. The super empath destroys the avoidance ego in another powerful way. They stop seeking validation from the avoidant altogether. Throughout the relationship, the empath may have spent months or even years hoping for more affection, more consistency, or more emotional openness. But once they awaken to their own worth, they no longer need the avoidance approval to feel valuable. This creates a dramatic reversal of power. The avoidant who once felt admired now realizes that their opinion no longer carries the same influence. The emotional leverage they once had disappears, and for someone who unconsciously relied on that leverage, the loss can feel devastating. Many avoidants secretly believe they can return whenever they want. They assume that the emotional door will always remain open. But a super empath who is truly healed does not wait indefinitely. They learn from the experience. They develop stronger boundaries. They begin attracting healthier relationships. When the avoidant eventually looks back and realizes the empath has genuinely moved on, it creates a level of regret that strikes directly at the ego. Not because they lost control, but because they lost someone who loved them in a way that is increasingly rare. They begin comparing future relationships to the connection they once had, and often discover that genuine empathy cannot be easily replaced. Perhaps the most painful realization for the avoidant is understanding that the super empath never wanted power over them. They only wanted connection. The avoidant spent so much time protecting themselves from vulnerability that they failed to recognize the gift standing right in front of them. The super empath offered understanding instead of judgment, patience instead of pressure, and loyalty instead of manipulation. Yet because the avoidant was focused on maintaining emotional distance, they often failed to appreciate what they had until it was gone. And nothing damages the ego more than realizing you pushed away something valuable with your own hands. There is another reason the super empath's departure hit so hard. They often emerge stronger than before. Instead of becoming bitter, they become wiser. Instead of remaining stuck in heartbreak, they transform the pain into growth. They build confidence. They establish boundaries. They create a life that no longer revolves around someone else's emotional availability. When the avoidant sees this transformation, it challenges the story they told themselves. They expected the empath to remain attached. They expected them to struggle forever. Seeing them thrive without the relationship creates a powerful emotional shock. In many cases, the avoidant begins reaching out only after the super empath has stopped needing them. This is one of the great ironies of avoidant dynamics. The moment the empath becomes emotionally independent is often the moment the avoidant becomes emotionally curious. But by then, the dynamic has changed. The super empath is no longer operating from loneliness or hope. They are operating from self-respect. They are no longer willing to sacrifice their emotional well-being for someone who cannot meet them halfway. And that realization alone can shatter the avoidant's sense of control. At the end of the day, a super empath does not destroy an avoidant's ego through revenge, manipulation, or cruelty. They destroy it through growth. They destroy it by recognizing their own value. They destroy it by walking away from one-sided relationships and refusing to settle for emotional crumbs. The avoidance ego suffers because it loses access to someone who once gave unconditional understanding. And the hardest truth of all is that by the time the avoidant fully understands what they lost, the super empath has already become the person they were always meant to be: strong, confident, emotionally free, and no longer waiting for someone else to choose them.